Hello, everyone. I'm Adelaide Bannerman. I'm an Associate Curator at Invisible Dust, and welcome to this afternoon's session with Rebecca Lazarou and Francis Disley. I'll just quickly introduce both speakers. We have Francis Disley, who is an participating artist in our current show at the Herbert Gallery, at the Herbert Museum and Art Gallery, in our show sorry, I've gone blank for a moment, UnNatural Histories, and she's one of the commissioned artists there. And Rebecca Lazarou, who's the plant scientist, who's a medicinal plant researcher at the Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew. And we'll be reviewing our relationships to the exhibition and then talking about the conversations that have kind of structured our relationships over the last few months. I guess that my starting point for the both of you is the exhibition, actually, and to look at how we have been thinking about the show. So the show UnNatural History, which has been developed over the last 2 years, really brings together a number of different artists who are working internationally and who are interested in biodiversity and kind of inspired by sciences. And then in turn, how artists have been intrinsic to the science. So what we've been doing, we've been trying to show there's many very different instances and covering a broad range of practices. Francis, yes, you've been working very much in the last year around medicinal plants, and I guess creating these this social context to bring people together around your sculptures and videos. You're one of our commissioned artists, and we situated you in a space where you shared the exhibition space with 2 other naturalists, Angela Brazil and Marianne North, who is a painter from the 19th century. I guess the first question that I'd like to ask you is how you felt about being within that room and the relationship to your practice.
So, yeah, I kind of like, as Adelaide described, Angela Brazil is probably the person that I had most of a connection with. And that had kind of influenced the work. So I was trying to make some connection with the parts of the collection that are already present at the Herbert, and yeah, Angela, who's better known as like a children's author, kept these amazing diaries, and I just had a little look at one of them with one of the curators, and as often happens when you kind of working around something and you think like, how can I kind of connect, and how can I like engage with this this other artist or this subject matter? And I thought, like, let's just have a look, and let's have a look at these this diary that she kept, and it spanned something like 20 odd years, and she just kind of dropped these entries into it that were like just noticing plants on daily walks, and because it's not like, because it seemed really apparent that it's not a document that was meant necessarily for the public to see. So her approach to it was really lovely, because it felt like it wasn't self-conscious. She just kind of noted, like, so there'll be an entry on, say, like the 13th of July or something, and it jumps from like 10 years or so, and she just notes what she's seen. And I went through with the curator from Herbert, Ali, and I said, oh, let's have a little look at the plants that she mentions before we meet. We just sat together and like picked 2 days and had a little chat around the plants that were in there. And it was just a really like grounding experience, because it, seasonally it was the same. It's the same plants that we see now, and it felt really like it felt like it reinforced that notion of how we can all be interconnected by the seasons, and the way these plants keep reappearing, and how resilient they are, and how like we could kind of connect through time, no matter what was going on, you know, like at that moment through circumstance. So it felt like, that felt really nice. It felt really lovely. And she made these watercolors that that happened to connect to one of the walks that we were looking at. And I've been making this work. A lot of the work that's in the Herbert is inspired by a new kind of more involved relationship with my local municipal park. At Liverpool, I'm in Liverpool, and there's lots of grand Victorian parks that are the places that usually kind of get super inhabited at weekends and get loads of attention. But the little kind of the, you know, functional sort of municipal grounds just don't get so much attention. And because it was so close to me, I started to notice all of the things that were growing there, like the hearties, dandelion, daisies, the cleavers, the mugwort, the plantain, the, you know, the yarrow, all of these wonderful things. And like they feature in those books, you know, that, so it felt like I could communicate with Angela over those sorts of things, and that there's like this common experience of these beautiful kind of urban garden green areas. Yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Not at all. I mean, I think everybody's kind of reevaluating the spaces that are around them now. We've definitely had that opportunity, I think, in the last year. But going back to the exhibition, maybe you might want to speak about how those experiences influenced the works that you had in there.
So there's a celebration of these little heroes. So I feel like I'm beginning a herbal journey, my herbal journey. So maybe like over the last 12 months, I've always been interested in like plants and growing, and the psychological benefits of being around plants. And it's always been somewhere that I've looked to when I've, you know, like gone through a period of anxiety or whatnot. So it's something that's always I've like recognized can have these really super positive effects on me mentally. So I've kind of gotten into this idea of like looking a little bit further into particular plants and how they can help us medicinally. And then when you start to like look at that, so noticing all of these plants that have these medicinal properties that are totally the sort of things that I would have pulled out normally or like really ignored. They're like the super common things that sort of follow you about. And I just wanted to make something that was a bit of a thank you to that green space and a thank you to the plants. And within the video, like I wrote like a letter to plantain and dandelion and yarrow, but I didn't put the yarrow one into the video. But it's basically like it's sort of my attempt to say thank you for this newfound relationship that we've got, because I'm really interested in like the idea that it's not a one-way street, and that like if you work with plants and you get to know these plants and they give you all these things, we can't just absorb them into our usual relationships with things that are other than human, where we're kind of like expecting something to just give us something. So I kind of felt like it would be a nice setting of the scene to move forward to sort of to thank the plants. And I'm really interested in sharing discoveries. So sharing my journey through this newfound kind of experience with plants and medicinal plants. So making it public. So getting a chance to talk to people that work with that, like Rebecca and Michael that works for phytology has been amazing. So it's kind of like, if I'm gathering all of this experience and knowledge, you know, I wanted to try and bring people along with me at this point where I'm like, you know, I don't know what this is, you know, I don't know whether it's safe, I don't know where it sits. So yeah, it felt really exciting to have the excuse to delve a bit deeper, but make it as public as possible. So, and I think also if I share things while it's a discovery for me, then I can be mindful of entry points, you know, and how people can come to something with no prior knowledge, and yeah, there's no kind of no assumptions made with that. So yeah, I kind of wanted the work to be an entry point for people into something that I'm discovering about as well, and like really reflecting on that, you know, what all the things that are problematic with prior relationships with plants and like green spaces and stuff, and how exclusive they can be. Yeah, all of that sort of thing's been kind of running around in my mind with it. So this I made these 2 videos. One of them feels like it was supposed to be quite, you know, really quite practical. So Rebecca and Michael described these plants that we were looking at, and they had the sort of love letters from me in there. And then I invited some people to play with the plant matter as well in the studio, and we filmed it. So that idea of like representing how you can actually develop a relationship with a plant, and it's in like a really physical way as well. So it's beyond just like researching and thinking, and all of the awkwardness of that. So and then the sculptural works are representative of this, like they have the live plants in there as well. So they're like, so you can actually go and have that real life experience with a plant. But they also represent the things that aren't present in a gallery space that plants need to thrive. So there's the full spectrum lights and the irrigation system. So it's alluding to how unnatural the kind of situation is, but also like showcasing the plants that I think are the things that, and throwing a load of love and care into the plants that are usually the things that kind of get ripped out. Yeah, and I'm starting to think like that they just follow us about, all of these little resilient plants. It kind of like, I feel like there's a message that they're sending us that we often ignore. Yeah.
There are aspects of what you said that I'd like to respond to. And I think certainly in terms of the journey that I've had in relation to the project or working on the project, and I think on a personal level, I think I've kind of been confronted with this feeling of estrangement that I've probably had with green space, actually, or I've been kind of reviewing, you know, if whether my relationship has been extractive. Obviously, I'm highly appreciative of green space and plants and all that, but the actual place that they have, I think, in my life has been absolutely crucial, you know, in the last few years, where I have felt that I think psychologically and emotionally I've been more dependent on them. And certainly going through this exercise or needing these different entry points into understanding what these plants are and what they do has certainly been a journey that I've started, and it's kind of a revelation to me. You know, I feel like a child. I feel like I'm at the beginning again, and so it's been kind of, you know, interesting to be able to develop an appreciation and understanding of how the science and the art kind of can come together, and how it's not, and how the art can make that tangible. I was wondering, Rebecca, I mean, you've kind of often kind of talked about how to, I think in your working approaches, about how to make around people's perceptions of nature and how to work around that. And I guess for me, there's been I've gone through this process of redefining what my perception is of the natural world around me. Can you probably talk a bit more about that in your line of approach?
About people's perceptions of nature?
Yeah, or even maybe starting with yours in relation to your work.
Absolutely, thank you. So perception of nature, for me, let me zoom out again, if I may. For me, two questions which I'm really fascinated by are, what the hell is a human and how do we get the most out of life, right? Because we're a very odd species. And my conclusion to that was, okay, well, we need to learn how to heal. In order to learn how to heal, because we all go through so much nonsense in life, you know, and if we don't heal, we can't recalibrate and live well. So in order to learn how to heal, we need to learn how to be balanced. In order to be balanced, we need to look towards nature, because nature is the crevice of all center. It's constantly regulating itself and bringing itself into a state of equilibrium. And I think, you know, growing up in a city, it's easy to become real disassociated from the natural rhythms of life, from nature. We just see plants as these like inanimate objects that your gran has in her house, you know, rather than a living, breathing organism, which we are a part of and in symbiosis with. And I honestly believe that that disconnection, which has been bred in the modern world, is such a massive cause for our anxieties, our depressions, all these problems that we have with our mental and emotional health, is because we don't have that place to restore and come home to, and that sort of nourishes us without us having to put lots of effort in. And so for me, cultivating that connection with nature and is about basically cultivating connection with self and connection with our communities. And although I am a scientist, I actually have quite a few problems with science, because the way modern science is, it's a very reductionist and approach, very, very materialist. We break things down. We say this is this, that does that, and we zoom in and we keep on doing that, and it makes us lose sight of the whole. And I think our obsession with being so materialist and reductionist is part of what has caused us to be so severed from nature in so many ways. And we sort of have lost sight of the whole way that we fit into everything. And so for me, nature is where we find all our healing. It is something we should submit to, rather than trying to submit to us and trying to control, if you will. And I just think people would be a lot happier if we did. I think it's a really simple answer to a lot of very complex questions. And so, yeah, that's what so much of what my work is about, is not just, you know, just finding a plant that stimulates a certain receptor to help you feel okay again. It's about nurturing that connection between our species and the natural world around us in any way possible. So yeah,
it's a funny one, isn't it? Because like it's, I think sometimes when we talk about nature, if you're not immersed in that world in a specific way, it's like some kind of light switch that we turn on. Like, I'm going to go to do some nature stuff. I'm going to be with nature. That's like it. I think that generalism, like generalizing, using the word, can be really problematic as well, can't it? It's kind of like then you're not stopping and seeing. It's not, nature isn't just a Lake District and a trip to Wales or somebody's fancy botanical garden. I think like, yeah, so it, like I kind of said in a conversation yesterday, like it's hierarchically, it sits us, it's really, it's very comfortable for us, isn't it, to be like, well, that's that, you know, I control it, I'm, you know, we're us, and nature is that, you know, we're not like, we don't see ourselves within that community at all, do we? It's like something we can turn off and on, and that's just absolutely ridiculous. And I think like if we can kind of shift, even if you spend a time like being specific about all of that, you know, all of the sort of being grateful for all of these elements, you know, like what's the nature in the room, like it. I think it's just it's too. I think sometimes when we talk about nature, we're talking about our controlled, safe version of it, and the bit that we can monetize as well. Like, I kind of feel like until we see ourselves as just a little element within all of that, like, you know, that then you, like you say, it just kind of it just and like causes all of those problems with the way we think. And, you know, maybe if we felt like we became part of that community, there'd be less onus on us to fix ourselves all the time, and like to, you know, I think seeing ourselves as less significant would be really liberating to lots of people.
Absolutely. And I feel that the feeling of awe and curiosity are so fundamental to living a full life. I really, really do. And it's something that as adults we don't often get to experience, because by the time we finished our to-do list, we're knackered or we're at the pub. And you know, there's a reason why since humans have started, we look at the stars, we're in awe, we're humbled, we're reminded of our place in the world. So many religions were made by cultivating that feeling just by looking at the nature around us. And it can be hard if you're in a city and the only thing around you are these pruned, pretty parks that are sometimes open, which is why I've created like a beautiful relationship with the moon, because it doesn't matter that I'm in London, she's still there. And every month I can look up, oh, it's a full moon, okay, I'm going to sit with myself now, I'm going to reflect what happened in this month for me, what am I grateful for, what do I want to do with this next month. And it's just this beautiful to be honest with you, at first when I spoke about these things I used to get so shy because I'm around scientists all day and they're very like, you can imagine, that's why I like talking to artists, you see. But it doesn't, you know, some people take it to the level where they feel the moon's energy and all these sorts of things. And I just think whatever relationship you have with it, it does not matter. We're all looking for a more harmonious way to live. And if sinking into nature's cycle gives you that and allows you to have that peace in your heart, enjoy it. What a gorgeous way to live, you know. And it's also, like many of us have gotten into gardening over lockdown, and I was doing a botany course and I had to buy a magnifying glass for it. And I honestly feel like a kid again in the garden, pulling out weeds. Oh my God, have you seen the patterns on that slug? Wow, have you seen the petal zoomed in? It's amazing. I'm so interested again. Like I feel free purely because my mind gets to follow something that it's interested in rather than having to input information, make something produce. And there's a real freedom when you're curious about the world, and there's nothing that breeds curiosity, awe and peace in the heart than nature. But unfortunately, you know, our culture isn't one where this connection is facilitated easily, so it's something that we have to find ourselves, but in a way that's real beautiful because it's not prescriptive, and it's up to us to silence the mind and sense in our heart when we actually feel connected to nature and what things do. You know, for the first time in so long, I want to draw again because I felt beauty, you know, and I haven't had that since I was 16. All it needed was a magnifying glass in the garden. So
exactly. Well, this is how I feel actually. I mean, when I go into places like in the nature reserve, or, you know, I just start zooming in on things, and that's the beauty, I guess, of having a camera with a macro that you can just kind of really get in there and just really kind of study, you know, certain species that, you know, I probably wouldn't have taken much notice of before, and want to ask questions, and it's kind of really stimulated a sense of discovery, you know, I think for me, that I haven't felt in quite a long time. And suddenly I've been thinking, oh, I've become quite jaded or whatever, or, you know, I never feel that there's this point that you stop learning. but certainly I've been inspired by, looking at what's around me in a new way. It's like the landscape looks very different, and I feel a bit more part of it. It's not just about going from from A to B anymore. It's about actually noticing the weeds that are coming up and how pretty they look, and just seeing, if there's a new planter that's been deposited somewhere on the street, just to make the street look lively, or what people are doing, how people are actually kind of getting together as well. And it just feels tangible in terms of that learning as well, how to kind of make it real as well.
Absolutely. And then there's also so many complexities, intellectual understandings that we have of the nature around us, be it ecology, be it folklore, that's been around for thousands of years. Humans have always had this obsession, romantic feelings about nature around us. Every single plant you look at, guaranteed there is many stories about the symbolism of this plant, the way our tribes and indigenous people gave meaning to them. And there's also loads of research about them now, which talks about the phytochemicals and all these different things. And I just I feel very grateful to be in a space where these different facets of the human mind can be married, and the plant world just inspires so much across so many different people. It's, I've got a friend, I'm obviously a scientist, but my friend works with herbal medicines, but hers has been entirely by meditating and sitting with the plants and seeing how they make her feel emotionally. And she talks to the flowers and all these things. And so many people would not be able to get to that level. Not that it's necessarily something that someone should aspire to, but I just think it's really beautiful and glorious that we are this strange little species that can, layer all these things around us with so many stories and meaning. And this is why I love speaking to artists about it, because I can shout all the statistics I want in the world about this in vitro study and the receptor it's stimulated and this clinical study, whatever. It doesn't mean anything if people don't feel. And that's why I love speaking to artists, because they're able to alchemize it and speak about these things in a perspective that's very nourishing. So yeah, I suppose that's part of our nature, isn't it? It's creating. So it's nice to be able to be a part of that.
When you talked about the moon before, it kind of made me think about how sometimes people think that they're excluded from certain practices, like they have to be part of a demographic to be the people that look at the moon or the cycles of the moon, or or whether people feel like they're green-fingered or knowledgeable enough to proclaim any sort of relationship to plants and the natural world. And I'm fascinated with how to communicate that it's yours and you can do what you want with it and interact on whatever level. It feels like sometimes those things aren't or are made to appear like they're not as accessible as they really are. The idea that looking at the moon, that nobody needs to, you don't need to look through a certain lens or know so much about it, and there's a consistency to it, and you can just observe it, I think is amazing. But on practical terms, it's kind of how and I think we said this in the conversation, do you send yourself a reminder, look at the moon? Sometimes we just don't. You don't look at what's in front of you, and how do you, because I've interwoven it into my practice, so it's my day to day, so I know that I've got this excuse, but I am interested in how we facilitate that, or make it and actually being realistic about that, and thinking about genuine entry points that aren't necessarily immediately totally at odds with people's general desires. It's just maybe shifting the impulse, because there's loads of common things within there, there's you know, for me, looking in the park and spotting all of these things, it definitely feels kind of close to, you know, some shopping things or other kind of like things that are more like perceived to be more toxic. I think maybe being a bit open and honest about like the parallels that could be forged between, you know, the things that we've culturally sort of absorbed as our usual day-to-day kind of ways to stay happy or calm, which, you know, sometimes can be just not the right thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, two things I want to say on that. Firstly, isn't it interesting that as a whole our culture is so isolated now that we're trying to find ways to normalize life in nature, you know? Like a few years ago I would have been seen as an absolute weirdo for noticing the moon and doing my rituals around that time, but it's trendy now and everyone on Instagram's doing it, girls like me doing it, so it's okay. And it's, yeah, I just find it quite fascinating that we're so disconnected in so many ways that being into nature is an oddity. And another thing that I wanted to say, something I've been thinking about a lot recently, is our habit of just clustering people. Oh, you meditate when it's the full moon. That must mean that you're also into summoning spirits and crystal healing. No, not for me personally. If you like that stuff, crack on, absolutely fine. But it's, you know, it's not for me. Or I don't know, you grow vegetables. Oh, well then you must be a vegan and an organic person and middle class and all these things. Like, you know, there's so many clusters within it, and it's just trying to be able to shake off all of the associations which aren't ours, so we can just connect with what is just ours, and it's what's personal to us. And I just feel like, for example, with men, I'm generalizing right now, but the only way I've seen men really connect to nature is if they're growing vegetables and doing that, or if they're really into psychedelics, to be honest. And apart from that, there's like, you know, not as much space to just let themselves be romanced by the flowers. Yeah, the analytical scientific part of it is like, okay, well, let's list all of the different ways that you can connect to nature. I haven't got the solutions for it. But yeah, I think shaking off clusters and being real nuanced about it is going to be important for it, and just normalizing it as well is not a feminine or masculine practice, like a spiritual one necessarily, because I know that word really irks a lot of people. It's about finding what works for them.
Yeah, I think that looking at the democracy of the invasive weeds is really helpful with all of that, isn't it? Like, it kind of, it's not about buying the kit or being part of a group of people. It's like these little things are just everywhere, like in the places that are totally overlooked and let grow wild. And they're outside of our control. And yeah, I kind of feel like listening to them can give us a clue about the kind of universality of all of this, you know, the kind of undiscriminatory kind of nature of little weeds, planets. And
may I ask, so you say listening to the weeds, and I'm curious to hear, in practice, what does that mean to you?
Most recently, I've started to just clock how particular things like ribwort plantain, it appears when we really mess up the landscape as well. And it kind of like, you know, it feels like and like the way the dandelions come back, and all of those like chickweed, it kind of feels like these, I feel like they're trying to tell me that they'll always keep coming back for us no matter how much we screw up, and that they just want to be noticed, and they're not judgmental. Like, they don't, it feels like they're not condemning the behavior, but they just keep showing up, and they're the ones that feel like they work with our bodies. They're the ones that can like help and heal us. And I feel like they're kind of telling me something at the moment about being like looking forwards and not necessarily feeling too bad about our behavior, but a clue to kind of like noticing and nurturing and caring for these little things. I feel like they're like the like a bit of a signal and a guide to the rest of the sort of natural environment. Yeah, that's what I keep my romantic notions around weeds lately.
Yeah, I love that. It's nice. My perception of weeds has changed so much since I've embarked in this career of medicinal plants. You know, I always saw sort of nettles as something so bad. Plantain I never even noticed. It was just this little thing that sprouts up between the pavements. And I was reading through the scientific literature and I was gobsmacked because I hadn't heard of plantain really before. I didn't even know the name. People assume that because I've got a master's in phytochemistry, my botany is really good, but it's awful. Like I know things in my head, but actually knowing what the plants look like it's a dying art. There's not much botany training anymore. And again, this goes into this reductionist, zoomed in way of doing science. They've spent millions of pounds on studies only to find out it was the wrong plant, but none of the lab people were actually trained in botany, so they just assumed they were doing the right thing. So we need to know as much as we can about these plants, and that includes old school sciences like botany. Sorry, I digress, but I was reading about plantain and the way it actually works in the body, and that there were studies where people having ulcers after having aspirin and ibuprofen, different pharmaceuticals, because they do have their side effects, and ulcers were reduced between 50 to 70% just by taking plantain. And I thought, this cheeky little weed I never noticed has such potent effects. And for example, with I love as well how herbal medicines pop up in the seasons when we actually need them. So for example, hay fever, absolutely rife now, and that's when elderflower comes out and when nettle comes out, and also plantain. And histamine, which makes us sneeze, obviously, is released. Basically, there's these white blood cells called mast cells, and when they break down, they release lots of histamine. Plantain stops these mast cells breaking down, so histamine doesn't get released. And then the nettle comes in and actually blocks histamine from being able to bind to receptors. And I just thought, I'm reading all this science and I'm like, there's so much complexity in how our bodies sync with these plants, which have hundreds, if not thousands, of molecules in it, and they work on so many different parts of our body. And I just love how synergistic and symbiotic it is with these plants growing when we actually need them. And in many ways, it just makes me think, well, what can I give back? Because I don't just want to extract and be like, oh, it's hay fever now, I'm going to go and tear out all these plants. I like, how can I care back? And that's something that I've been more and more curious about. Yeah,
I think similarly, because reviewing kind of past behaviors or what are my actual relationships to plants as well, and rather than going beyond appreciating the beauty of them, what else is there, and even just understanding that kind of interaction that you might have on that kind of molecular level with plants that you're walking by. And I think this is what people are missing generally, how important the health of the plant is to our own well-beings. And you kind of wonder, well, how can you what can you do in your kind of small corner to help further that kind of education, and just trying to find strategies or ways in which to do that.
Absolutely. And also it's so complicated, but I know that now more than ever we need to connect to plants, even if it doesn't make sense the way we are connecting to these plants. It needs to happen, which is why I'm a massive advocate for the psychedelics revolution, because mushrooms in general, they very strange organisms, more closely related to animals than they are plants, but they've been shown to, like, could be a massive key for renewable energy, could be a massive key for sorting out our waste, could be a massive key for building materials, and also mental health. I'm not sure if you've seen how many clinical trials are going on now for PTSD, chronic depression, anxiety, bulimia, so many different things are, you know, my friend does research at Imperial, and they're saying they're going to be on the NHS in the next 5 years because the profound effect they have on the human psyche is able to help people shift from decades of just disconnection and emotional pain. And I'm fascinated because there's also a lot of indigenous use around these plants and these mushrooms and stuff. And what they consistently talked about is how they connect them to nature in a very deep and spiritual way. And, you know, the pharmaceutical companies are very interested in symptoms that you can treat, and it treats this disease and blah, 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 blah. But I'm saying we need to connect to the natural world in any way possible right now in order for the health of the planet and the ecosystem. It's not as disconnected as we are using lots of rubbish. We need to be using things that biodegrade and blah, blah, blah. I think, like, on a mind, body, emotional, material way, the connections between the plants, the natural world and humans needs to be facilitated. And I think that, going back to what you were saying, it's a privilege to be able to be sustainable, to be able to buy from refill shops, to be able to buy organic food, to be able to buy reusable things, like have the money in a lump sum to pay more and stuff like that. But I'm curious as to the ways where you don't need money, or you don't need lots of time. You don't need all of these things, which are privileges, to be able to connect back to nature. By the way, disclaimer, I'm not saying everyone go and take loads of magic mushrooms. I'm just fascinated by the fact that we are at crisis point and the earth is popping up these things just when we need them, you know, just to try and bring it back to balance.
Well, I think it's interesting, going back to the point of, you know, how do we, it kind of feels like we're in this moment where we have to kind of grow an army of facilitators to be able to help do that work. And I guess that's what I feel panicked about, really, in terms of that realization and how many years that's going to take. And if whether, you know, without sounding too, you know, kind of dystopian, but we are in a climate crisis. And I guess there are moments where I think, are we too late to do that? You know, so how do you begin to, you know, instill this ways of working when you're living in a world that is going in a particular direction and doesn't want to change? You know, how do you encourage people to just hopefully think small, and hopefully that these feelings kind of radiate? I mean, in terms of the effort that is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy to feel absolutely powerless in the tsunami of problems that are on their way. And I agree with you, but I also don't agree in the sense that I think so many people are really switched on and then really, really panic about us having the single use, getting rid of single use plastic straws isn't going to be the one that fixes problems. We need real top down incentives to change. And on the same time as well, I think there is a lot of effectiveness in grassroots organisation, and I think it's real powerful as well, sort of like the mycelial network, how I'm sure you've heard about in the forest, how all the trees are connected through the fungi and they've got their different points and stuff. Yeah. And I think it's the same in human communities, that we all sort of look after ourselves, and then when we connect, we become all the more powerful. So I do think there is a lot of beauty in and power in community organising, and also conversations like this, and basically just finding the others and keeping this current of intention going in the people that aren't in power. But when it comes to the people at the top, I don't know what will sway their influence, to be honest. I haven't got that answer. I just know that people continuing to talk and set intentions and just facilitating different lifestyles slowly is going to be a massive part of this.
Yeah, I think that like individual level empowerment thing is really necessary as well, isn't it? And I think shifting people's relationship to the immediate natural world is like, it shouldn't make you complacent, but it feels like it's got to be a positive, because like, even if it's like a replacement for things that feel like, I think like having a moment where you know that you can go and interact with the plant, and like it can support you through life, shows you an alternative, doesn't it? It kind of shows you like a non-monetized alternative, and then when you share that with your friends and your family and their connection, and then that like that kind of sparks another conversation, it in theory you can start to like visualize the things behind you that you thought were necessary that aren't necessary. And you know, like if there was a chance you could spread that, like even just the idea of when you like people go to the shop and buy a shower gel, you know, like all of those little things that are about self-care that you don't, that are so kind of like quickly consumed and are like invisible. You know, it would be amazing if we could just if that could kind of shift people's behavior by just offering up like a bit of an alternative.
Making it normalized and accessible, absolutely. And another point I wanted to make as well was, don't ever underestimate the butterfly effect, and ever underestimate what happens when you actually follow curiosity. I think real impactful things can happen. So if someone is curious about nature, just go and see. I mean, my whole career happened because I had a dream about a tree, and I just followed it, and now it's led to like an amazing path. And I know quite a few people who have just followed things not making sense, but nature has called and they listened. And another thing that I wanted to say as well is that in us cultivating our connection to nature, showing our friends, and then they get excited about it, showing our kids or whatever, we're more inclined to protect it. We are more inclined to sign that bloody petition about that green belt that they're going to cut down, and we are more inclined to do things that are actionable and not just so passive, like, oh, it's not in our hands, we can't do anything, or just staying in ignorance. Like, when you love something, you protect it. And so any parts of culture that can just facilitate humans loving nature, I think that's real impactful. You know, people will invest time, energy, money into that. So yeah, even if it just seemed menial and just romantic to sit with a plant for the day, it's not isolated. This is a seed that is planted that you're carrying through your heart for the rest of your life. And if you keep nurturing it, beautiful things can happen. And it's just a nice way to live.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, and thinking about the access to all of that, I think is important as well, because you can mobilize a whole other demographic that feel like they have, you know, that they're excluded from nature in that conversation because they don't have a garden or green space that's their little thing, you know, like thinking about nature that's in the proper public sector that's not controlled by anyone, can feel like empowering and more sort of radical, and you're kind of like, yeah, in theory talking to a whole different group, aren't you, of people that, yeah, that are like, you know, need to feel like they can reconnect, you know. Yeah,
It's freedom, it's utter freedom. And not one person that I've met in my life anyway who doesn't love and appreciate nature in some way. Doesn't matter if you're a banker in a suit, you're going to feel at peace if you're in the fields, you know. Or like at Phytology, he was saying they had a group of boys who'd been excluded from school, aggressive behaviour, working class kids, blah, 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 blah. But they went to the nature reserve and they were curious and they were calm again and they felt happy being productive, working with the nature there, stuff like that. Like, oh, I would love it if there was more impetus, I think that's the word, where, you know, just more like jobs and areas where people are working directly with plants. That would just be sensational, wouldn't it?
Yeah, or valuing that skill set as well that some people have for growing things indoors, you know, that like all of those kind of nurture and care for your own sort of domain. Yeah. And like you said, that thing about if you don't know what it is, how do you value it? Once you know what it is, and that's not about botanical names and like having to research, but like how do you value and how do you safeguard something if you don't even know it's there? So just like how to notice and see. Yeah, it's dead important.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I was thinking that the other day, actually. It was one of those shower thoughts. I was like, about the importance of language and why it's so important to be able to communicate well. And I was thinking a couple of people could be having the most fascinating conversation that has the answers to all of my problems and it's just amazing, but they could be speaking in Mandarin, which I don't speak. And so it's not important to me. I don't really care. I don't know. You know, it's just people gibbering. And so it's that importance of language and communication is at the heart of how connection is facilitated and how mobilization happens, which is why art and science need to talk more and work together more. Because as I said, science is dry, and that's why we need the artists to come in and make people feel.
But how do you try to facilitate that with your colleagues, with your scientific colleagues? I mean, do you find that there are ways in which you can do that yourself?
Yes and no. There's some conversations I don't have with them because it's not the right audience. And I respect that. Same with the wellness side. There's some scientific perspectives which they'll just be like, oh no, that's it's not right, whatever. Pick and choose when people are willing to listen. You know, it's that symbiosis of being able to sense when to give and when to hold back.
Do you feel that you create those meeting points? So do you feel that you create those meeting points where those kind of sets of ideas can coexist? I mean, do you feel that's...
Yeah, in many ways, yeah. I feel in many ways I feel like communication is one of my skills. My parents are first generation migrants, Greek, Cypriots, and a lot of my family over here. English isn't their first language too. Also, working class backgrounds. So there was the education barrier. So I had to find ways to communicate complex things in ways which were accessible. And that's become a real useful thing because it doesn't matter if you've got a PhD in computer science. It doesn't know that doesn't mean you have botanical knowledge or biological knowledge as well. So it's been I feel like I've been lucky to have a life which has facilitated me being able to talk well. But when it comes to having conversations about things that people aren't used to having conversations about, it's a co-creation, I suppose. It's much about listening as it is me talking, because you have to be able to feel what people will be open to listening to. And I can't do that if I'm just sat there thinking, okay, what can I say to them next, Yeah. And I'm also incessantly curious. I ask as many questions as much as I talk as well. So that again helps with the co-creation. It's an ecology. Everything is the World Wide Web. Everything is symbiotic,
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're in the last 3 minutes of our conversation. I just kind of wondered if you had any closing comments or things, or any points that you might want to, that you recall from earlier that you might want to address again.
I'd set everyone a task to go and notice something today. Like, if you can, anyone that's listening to this, or anyone that listens to the recording this, if you take out like 10 minutes just to walk up your street, or if you can, you know, and just notice, and just have like, just as a little meditation, and just notice what's growing, like what are the things that you think, you know, like the things that are growing in the cracks of the street, and just, yeah, just try and connect.
I would 100% say just buy a magnifying glass. I can't tell you how exciting it is to look at things from a different lens again. And then also another practice which I really love, which came from lockdown actually, going on these little walks every day. Look at the same tree every time you go out and just see how it changes over the seasons. It's beautiful to watch. Didn't notice it before.
Yeah.
And I'd also say, if you ever look and think, oh, it's a full moon, let yourself stay for a moment and be like, oh, it's nice. Instead of just rushing by, you know. And also, please let me know if there's other community projects going on where people are growing or making plant art, or there's so many different amazing things which people are doing with nature. Please let me know. I'm so curious to hear, because there's just loads of things popping up everywhere, but we haven't all found each other yet. So I want to know, so stay in touch.
And how can people get in contact with you, Rebecca?
So my main page is on Instagram, it's Laz the Plant Scientist, so LAZ the Plant Scientist. And my website is www.laztheplantScientist.com. So yeah, definitely stay in touch, be a part of the community. Let me know if there's anything you want to learn about medicinal plants. And tell me your tales of nature. I'm always curious to hear.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you. I had such a lovely time.